Trek to Yomi is a brutal and stylish action game, inspired by classic Japanese cinema, which is appropriate as it often left me feeling like I'd much rather be watching than playing it. The trek begins with young Hiroki, practicing to become a samurai. But it's not long before the piece is shattered and the stage is set for a classic tale of revenge. Some of you may be wondering, where is Yomi and why are we trekking there? Well, in Shinto mythology, Yomi is the land of the dead. It's the afterlife. And as it's in the game's name and store description, I don't think it's a spoiler to say a large part of the game takes place in this netherworld, full of golem-like tainted and vicious spirits. And I have to say, it can be a real treat for the eyes and ears. The camera is purposefully and expertly placed to frame each scene, capturing the great lighting and detail they've put into the world. The black and white style and cinematic aspect ratio works well with a nice film grain effect to sell that filmic feel. Not every scene is particularly memorable, but it certainly has more than its share of screen grab worthy moments. And the authentic sounding soundtrack, combined with strong Japanese voice work, rounded out the audio-visual package perfectly. The story is a relatively short tale of love, duty, and revenge, clocking in at around 5 hours. The characters are quite classically stoic and stiff, which works for the setting, but they didn't have enough screen time or character development for me to truly care about them. They're more just rough outlines of a hero, a love interest, and a villain, giving you just enough motivation for the trek. There is some choice along the way too, with multiple endings. But there wasn't enough choice to give me a sense of ownership of the story, but just enough to leave me with a feeling of, so did I get the good ending or the bad one? And I couldn't help but wonder if a stronger singular plot would have had more impact. While the adventure is very much linear, there is some exploration along the way, with a few forked roads or hidden areas. These often hid collectibles, as well as upgrades that will improve your total health, your stamina, and how much ammo you can carry. I do love having extra areas to explore and upgrades to find, but I also suffer from massive bi-directional FOMO anxiety. Is this the right way or the explory extra way? Because I need to explore the wrong way first, and if I go the right way and miss an upgrade, I'll just be annoyed and thinking about that for the rest of the game. That is more of a critique of myself than the game, mind you. Anyway, it was mostly the action which let down the adventure for me. Combat always takes place on a 2D plane. You have a light and a heavy attack, and a block which can be timed to parry blows and open a window for a counter. There are also various combos and special moves you'll learn across the adventure, as well as some ranged weapons, which can be very useful in a pinch. You can take a few hits before dying, but you'll have to make your health last until you can find a shrine. These are basically checkpoints that restore your health. You'll also need to keep an eye on your stamina, as simply holding block as foes rain down blows upon you will drain it quickly, as will spamming attacks. If it hits 0, you'll essentially become a living practice dummy. While it all works, I didn't find it to be particularly satisfying. I quickly fell into a rhythm where I'd just parry and counter my way through every fight, which became pretty repetitive. And it's not for lack of trying, mind you. I wanted to use all the combos, but every time I attempted anything fancy, I'd be quickly punished. So I'd just fall back to what works to simply make it through each section. Fighting enemies on either side of you also didn't feel great. You essentially lock into whatever direction you're facing so that you don't turn your back to an enemy as you back up in a fight, which I get, but that means changing direction requires a dedicated button press, or a special move, which often just felt unresponsive or clunky to actually do in the heat of battle. There is a handful of different enemy types, like some with armor that require heavy attacks to be effective against, ranged attackers you'll need to prioritize, or some more exotic spirits. But none of them really require anything other than the old parry counter to deal with. There are also boss fights, but they're not much to write home about. They were either just normal guys with big health bars, or had attacks I couldn't seem to block or parry, which encouraged me to just cheese them with ranged attacks. And that felt like it was going against the fundamental combat system here. And to top it off, combat has a slightly underwhelming sense of impact to it all. Despite the copious blood spray, animations feel a bit stiff, and hits all just feel a touch squidgy. Still, it's not awful by any means. I can see what they were going for, and there were some sequences when the flow of blocking, dodging, and slashing through a wave of foes was satisfying. There are also 3 difficulties you can choose. I went for the medium option and found it wasn't too much of a challenge, until it was. The early game throws shrines at you after every few foes you dispatch, making it a breeze. But towards the end there were some difficulty spikes, thanks to several shrineless, enemy-infested stretches that became a tiresome test of patience to get through. There is also a special fourth one-hit, one-kill difficulty unlocked on completing the game. Here everything except bosses takes just one hit to kill, including you. I tried it out for the opening act, and the increased lethality certainly added some punch to the combat, and made the previously underwhelming shurikens into satisfying I win buttons. But the instant death part made it punishing enough that it wasn't something I was keen to see through to the end. But I'm sure some will enjoy the challenge. I'm not usually one to tell people what difficulty they should use, different strokes for different folks and all that, but I think I would have genuinely enjoyed this more if I'd chosen the easy story mode, which after playing a little bit of, did make the combat feel more lethal and satisfying. And no doubt it would have taken the edge off some of those frustrating late game sections. All up, I certainly commend the developers for having a strong vision. And if you're a fan of Japanese cinema or just love how this looks, then you'll likely enjoy the wonderful aesthetic enough to be pulled through the serviceable action. And if you can grab this on any kind of subscription service you may be signed up to, then it's a short and interesting game that does something just a bit different, and I think many could spend a fond afternoon with it. For most though, the story isn't powerful enough and the combat not engaging enough for me to recommend a purchase. Pass.